Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Young Guns, the OUTSET panel show. I'm Stephen Perkins, editor-in-chief of the OUTSET network, and joining me this week is Evan Schrage and Caleb Franz. Now, Caleb is joining us as someone who will be starting a podcast of his own coming up here within the next month on the OUTSET network. This Saturday, he will have a preview episode of his new podcast. Caleb, tell us a little bit about your upcoming show.
Yeah, so basically the idea is that we've wanted to kind of form a community of liberty-oriented individuals. So on the show, there will be a lot of commentary, but also a lot of discussions, a lot of interviews of people in their respected field, experts in their respected field. And it's going to be a blast.
Good deal. We're definitely looking forward to it. And again, there's a preview episode that will be on Saturday, this Saturday, but the show will whenever it launches, it will be on Thursdays. All right. So this week we're talking about three things specifically that have kind of been going on this week, some of them very recently. The first is the Trump family leave proposal. We're also going to dive into Clinton's return to the campaign trail after Sunday's incident, maybe a little bit about her book that released this week to not so great sales, and a new bill that would allow families or the victims of 9/11 to sue Saudi Arabia, expected to be vetoed by President Obama. But let's start, guys, with this the Trump plan for paid family leave. Now, this is interesting to me because this is Trump, you could say, going towards the left, and in any case going towards the middle, because a lot of conservatives don't agree with government-mandated or government-supported paid leave programs. But standing beside Ivanka Trump, he unveiled this program that it really only covers women, whereas Hillary's plan, as she has noted over the past 24 hours or so, covers more than just women. But nonetheless, it is, I think, significant that a Republican campaign has released a family leave plan. Evan, I want to get your thoughts on this first. What do you think about Trump's move to do this? Do you think that this really alienates conservatives, or are they already alienated enough?
I'm not entirely sure if it alienates conservatives necessarily. So Donald Trump proposed 6 weeks, I think it was, of maternity leave for a woman working in the U.S. Obviously, there's a very big, government component to that. But he also proposed childcare expenses, the costs of daycare and things like that would be tax deductible, and that's a very, I think, interesting prospect for families. With young children, obviously, I think the national average for healthcare childcare is about $11,000 a year. So for people that, small government conservative type people that want to, have lower taxes, that's $11,000 a year that they're not necessarily going to have to pay to the federal government because they, just so happen to have kids. And pretty much everybody, I think, is covered by that program. If I remember correctly, if you were a single parent making less than $250,000 a year, you were eligible for that. So that pretty much covers any new family, or at least up until sixth grade or 6 years old when it's time to start first grade. So I'm not. It's a two-prong thing because tax deductions are always good, but the government mandating that you must allow, in Donald Trump's case, a young mother taking off a month and a half to take care of their newborn, while noble and while something, it's a very good idea. It's not necessarily something that conservatives look to government to mandate for people. So that's, I think, kind of where that's at right now.
I think another interesting angle to it is the fact that that paid leave is in some ways responsible, at least in part, for kind of this true wage gap that we see, and that's the sense that not the traditional wage gap that many on the left would talk about. There's a lot of arguments that that's not a real thing, but when you have this paid leave, and obviously 6 months is not as significant as other programs or other ideas out there. If I remember correctly, I think Bernie's plan would have been much longer than that. Hillary's plan, I believe, is 12 months. I might be wrong on that.
12 weeks, yeah.
Well, or 12 months, 12 weeks. Yeah. But nonetheless, it certainly doesn't. I think there is a negative aspect to it, not just of the president that it sets for the government, but also what it does to women and their status in the workplace. Caleb, as someone who thinks that the government should not do anything, including road building, what do you think of this new Trump family leave plan?
Yeah, I mean, kind of echoing what Evan said. The tax deduction part is, I'm obviously going to be for tax cuts in any way, shape, and form whenever it's possible. However, I think it really illustrates how much Trump is really confused on just basic economics. He thinks he can, just kind of point his finger and say, I will make it great. I will make America great again. I'll make the economy great again. I'll make, families great again. But just because he mandates something, just because government in any way, shape, or form mandates something, obviously does not make it automatically better. We conservatives generally understand this when you're pointing fingers at the left with Hillary, with Bernie, about things as basic as things like minimum wage. But then when it comes to this, I think that it's a little bit of a double standard for them not to at least question Trump and say, what are you doing here?
So I see this largely as Trump's attempt to kind of court some of those independent voters, and certainly he's not someone who is the conservative that a lot of Republicans thought we would have this year, and this certainly shows that. What's interesting is that the Clinton response right away was, well, it's not as comprehensive as my plan, and it's not as good as my plan. And so now the Trump campaign, ever since this thing rolled out, has now been on the defensive, having to come up with a message that it's still a good plan, even though it doesn't cover all the people that Hillary's plan would cover. In my view, just another side note, I really dislike when we have all these different promises for tax deductions. I'd rather just have a lower tax rate is kind of my thing. Like that's the side that I would go on, instead of all these different things that I think just complicate taxes. But in terms of appealing to people who are kind of on the fence about Trump, do either of you think that this is going to make someone go, oh, okay, yeah, he's my guy, this is it?
No, I don't particularly think that that this is going to do anything like that. I think it might, maybe if there's somebody who is just like maybe some Bernie guys that haven't just been completely drawn out of the political process ever since Bernie endorsed Hillary, it might make them think a little bit more towards Trump, but I don't ultimately think it's going to do much good of anything.
There's this weird theory that Bernie supporters would naturally, whenever Bernie dropped out, that they would go to Trump, which I always thought was so laughable. But again, his plan was a little more extreme than what Trump rolled out. But Evan, interesting question for you. The Republican Party has historically, recently, been the party of family values, the party of the family. Is paid maternity leave? I can't speak today. Is paid maternity leave one of those family value things that the Republican Party should be pushing?
I think what Republicans and conservatives often really suck at is we want to say that when something like paid family leave comes up, the idea that families with newborns should be, spending as much time with their kid as possible, certainly a family value. We kind of, whenever the Democrats or progressives propose those kind of top-down initiatives, we say, oh, well, no, that's not the government's place. But then we don't really do anything about it afterwards. There's no big conservative movement to, pressure businesses to like mandate those kinds of things for their workers in the first, in this next place, letting, the free market take its course and telling employers like, hey, we all want to, work and stuff, but we also have these other values that we need to get along with. And I think that try as Trump might, I don't think that this is going to influence much of many voters, certainly not many Republicans, in part because his plan to pay for it is very suspect, especially when compared to Hillary Clinton's, because his plan involves fixing welfare or unemployment insurance fraud. And that's very speculative, because if you don't come up with you don't find as much fraud as you thought you were going to, you don't really have any way to pay for it. Hillary obviously is just going to tax the rich, and that's fine, but at least that there's a more measurable standard than just going after unemployment insurance fraud, which isn't going to help him with those, the middle class people, the people that tend to need unemployment insurance. It just creates further, not that they're, more likely to commit fraud or anything, but just the more bureaucracy that they're going to have to jump through now to make sure that they can actually get their welfare benefits. I don't think it is actually a win-win on from anybody's perspective.
Well, not to generalize, but I think the Trump campaign has a lot of policies that don't really have an implementation plan. And to be fair, the Clinton campaign has a lot of policies that don't have an implementation plan, or her plan is to raise taxes on the rich, which is still, interestingly enough, as much as she says it, is still a controversial issue, especially when you start talking about, well, who are the rich? What would the tax rate be? When you get into those specifics, which these candidates aren't talking about as much. But I would agree with you, Evan, the idea that, well, we're just going to attack fraud and that's going to free up all these billions of dollars for this program, I think is a very ambitious plan. And I don't mean that in an expressly positive way, right. Because I think there needs to be a little more logistical support behind it. But Trump is not, his personality-wise, he's not the logistical guy. He's the dreamer guy. And supposedly he has logistical people on his team. We haven't seen the product of their work, but supposedly they're there. Caleb, I want to get your view on this, and then we'll go and talk more about Clinton. In terms of, we talked a little bit about the government's role. We know the costs that are associated with this. But I'm interested in your take on kind of the specifics of the plan, and if just in general the paid maternity plan, whether it's Clinton's or Trump's, is kind of a realistic approach that government should be taking on, or a realistic feat that they should be taking on. I think I know your answer, but we'll let you give yours.
Yeah. So. It's kind of funny. Anytime that government really wants to jump in and say we're going to do this, there's always going to be a hidden cost, and it always backfires on them, because at the end of the day, what it ultimately does come out of is the pockets of taxpayers in some way, shape, or form, and that ultimately comes back to bite people just right back in the rear end. So ultimately, I think it is kind of set up for failure from the get-go, just as much as some of Hillary's or some of Bernie's policies would be anyway.
For sure. Well, let's move on to Clinton. So Hillary Clinton, after the 9/11 memorial on Sunday, as everyone knows by now, thanks to videos and all sorts of coverage of it, she had a health scare. She essentially passed out because of what the campaign is saying is heat exhaustion. As it came out, she was diagnosed with pneumonia last week, and so now the discussion about her health and whether she is quite literally fit enough to be president is now back at the forefront of the news. And I've always been someone who I think that the Republicans have been very lazy when they said, well, the problem with Hillary is that she's old and she doesn't know how to manage email. I thought those were very lazy approaches to challenging her and her ideas, because they weren't challenging her ideas, they were challenging her personality, perhaps her record. But now we have what I think is a considerable discussion about the health of candidates. It's now led Donald Trump to reveal his medical history on Dr. Oz, which I think is funny that the TV star reveals his stuff on a TV program. It kind of makes sense. But nonetheless, Hillary Clinton is back on the campaign trail this week. And whenever you say that she's back, it kind of brings up this thought of like, oh, she's ready to go full force. And a lot of people are saying, wow, look at her. She's working through an illness. If you look at the days that she's taken off over the past month or two, it's been a lot of days. She has not hit the campaign trail as hard as as hard as you would think that someone would. Maybe that's because polls have been largely in her favor, and maybe she doesn't feel like she needs to. A lot of those days have been fundraisers. It's not necessarily direct contact with voters, but nonetheless, she's back on the campaign trail, and she's not able to kind of shake off these reports of her health. Evan, I know that I'm fairly sure that we've chatted before about this, and that is that it's annoying. Like the discussion surrounding her health has been annoying to the point of where it's like she's not dying, and she's not going to die tomorrow. And if the ground game, I say ground game, I know it's not a ground game, but if the strategy of the Republicans is hopefully Hillary, is not healthy enough to be president or to continue running for president, they're going to lose more than they're already losing. But what are your thoughts on she's back?
She is back. Well, for another couple of days. There was a lot of talk, like you had said, about, oh, well, good, she's powering through her illnesses, and that just shows leadership people. I just kind of think of that. I'm like, yeah, that's great if she's like 20 and can power through a sickness, but like she's not, and neither is Donald Trump, to be honest with you. When you're, later in life, things start to happen. I don't buy the whole there's a hidden conspiracy going on that she's somewhat sicker, but it's fine if she got sick. Like, for me at least, like a coughing fit isn't going to make me think Hillary is unqualified to be president. There are many, many reasons why Hillary Clinton is unqualified to be president. But getting sick when you're almost a 70-year-old woman is not one of them. It really just isn't. Now, I think that for the large part, Hillary Clinton is trying to stay out of the limelight as much as she can, because the more Donald Trump says the terrible things that she's saying, or that he's saying, the more likely it is for her to win. She doesn't have to say another word, and Donald Trump will continue to put his foot in his mouth right up until November 8th, and she'll be elected to the presidency. And that's not exactly how it's supposed to be, but it's kind of sad at the state of affairs that this has come to where she could literally disappear. And she's still beating Donald Trump in many, many swing states, despite not having been out. So it's, it's annoying, but at the same time, she's still winning. So don't fix what ain't broken,
Yeah, so there were a lot of things you said there that I agree with. The first of which is that, she coughs. That doesn't mean that she's not able to be president. I get that we have, Barack Obama, who upon entering office had a six-pack, but we don't have the same options this time. But that's not a bad thing. Like, if you remember in 2008, John McCain was constantly harassed about his health, and he really didn't have any issues. I mean, any real issues. And now they're saying, oh, Hillary had pneumonia and all of these things. And I have some people who are not like on political media, but they're still on the right, and they say, oh my goodness, someone her age with pneumonia, people die all the time. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's a little different. Hillary's not 80. She's older, but she's not 80. She's not falling apart. The rigors of a campaign season, believe it or not, will cause someone to maybe not feel their best all the time. And there was this thought of like, okay, if you were followed around by media for 2 years, they're probably going to catch you having a pretty bad day every once in a while. But Caleb, I think what I'm most concerned about is that we're now entering debate season. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are going to be the only ones up there, saying Al Johnson is looking like he's not going to get on that stage. Is this, when Trump goes and attacks Hillary, is it actually going to be something about substance, or is it going to be these types of nonsense attacks?
Well, I think the answer there lies in, the rest of his campaign hasn't even been really much of substance. So I don't see any reason to believe that whenever he finally goes up on the debate stage with Hillary, it's going to be any better. I mean, this is the same guy who openly mocked the Republican candidates during the primary season for insignificant things, and whenever we actually got some substance during the primary debates I noticed that whenever Trump was like out of it for like 20 minutes. So I see no reason why the primary or the general election debate would be any different.
Do you remember that one debate that Trump wasn't in?
Yes.
Debate?
Yes.
Wasn't that a beautiful debate?
Yes, it was. I also remember the one that Rand wasn't in, and he owned that one as well.
Of course you do. Yeah, that one's probably tougher on you to remember that one. I apologize
It was probably his best night, even though he wasn't on stage. So
that's true. He was live tweeting it, wasn't he? So, I mean, I try not to be the pessimistic person, even though it's very easy to do with this election. But you just get the sense of like we're not really going to get a fair shake, or we're not really going to get a fair look at what the candidates have planned. I think what's interesting is that Hillary Clinton is someone who historically is very policy driven. Like, she loves policy. She's a big old nerd, and that's fine. Like, good for her. And I don't think she's going to get the opportunity to put that out in the forefront. In 2008, she was up against a very charismatic person who had a very good message. And again, her specifics on policy kind of were pushed to the side. I think this year's going to be a lot of the same thing. And I think largely it's because you have to look at the demand. Voters I don't really think they care. I mean, we care because we're into politics.
We're nerds.
We're invested in it. But I don't think the other voters care. What were you saying, Evan?
Said we're nerds.
We're nerds. Yeah. We're very similar to Hillary Clinton.
Right. Well, and I think we're kind of seeing a trend on, people haven't really cared about policy in a very long time. In many ways, Donald Trump is exactly the kind of presidential candidate that people have wanted. Not necessarily all of the things he said, but if we had an election season that was just a couple months long of like SNL skits, like, people would go crazy over that. And it's sad in some sense, and it's cool when candidates actually act like people, and there are terrible people in the world. There's no denying that. But at some point, and I was hoping it was going to be after the conventions, we'd finally realize, like, okay, let's actually start acting like adults.
It's very wishful thinking, and I thank you for being the idealist with me. I think that, listen, there's a considerable challenge ahead of people who are really kind of vested in a serious debate, and we're just not going to get it. I really think they can make the debates probably 30 minutes, because that's all we really like. I don't know if I can stand more than 30 minutes of a debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but nonetheless, Hillary's health, I think, will continue to be kind of at the forefront of it. Also an interesting note, her new book, I was looking up, I told you all before we started, her new book, which is called Stronger Together. It's kind of her thing. It has sold just 2,912 copies in its first week. Not a lot of purchases from that. I didn't even know she had a book coming out until I saw a tweet about it today. But it is essentially the fluffed up version of her campaign plan, because no one's going to read the white papers on policy that the candidates put out. So it's kind of her selling that idea to people. I mean, then again, people still have to be literate to read it, I suppose, but nonetheless, it's selling that policy. So if you haven't read that, I don't know, pick it up if you want to give that sales push. Anyways, let's go on to our final topic of the night. And this is an interesting one. And Evan, I know you have thoughts on it, but this is an interesting topic because it's so, like, it's bizarre. It kind of makes sense, but when you look at it on a certain level, you're like, that's really weird. And that is this bill, a bipartisan bill. Evan, I know you take issue with that lately. But it is a bill that would allow the families of the victims of 9/11 to sue the Saudi government because of the Saudi knowledge of the supposed knowledge of the hijackers and the plot and all of that. It's now headed to President Obama's desk, and the White House has said that he will veto it this week. And then Congress is saying that they will try to override that veto. So, Evan, first of all, let's get out there your criticism with this bill, and also why is it not necessarily bipartisan? Maybe not.
Right. So the bill was it's been brewing kind of since 2008 or so. After 9/11, there was, wide speculation about who was held responsible. And as you know, we've now recently more documents have kind of come out about 9/11, and it was revealed that Saudi Arabia played a little bit of a hand, actually a pretty big hand in helping the terrorists that eventually took over the planes and crashed into the World Trade Centers. And so what this bill essentially does is amends the Foreign Sovereign Immunity Act, which is a bill. Generally, there's a legal principle that says that if the state can't be sued for things, the state can't actually commit crimes. There have been certain exceptions for that over the years. The most famous, I think most people can relate to, is The Woman in Gold, the movie that came out with Ryan Reynolds and about the Austrian government that owned a painting that was taken from a Jewish family during the Holocaust, and she sued in U.S. court, and the Austrians had to give the painting back. Essentially, that's what they're trying to do. This bill was trying to do with the families of 9/11. Normally, a private citizen in the U.S. can't just go sue the government of a foreign country just because they want to. Or because even if they have some reason, like their family was killed. This essentially gives them permission to go sue in federal district court the government of Saudi Arabia. It was passed by a voice vote in the Senate, so there wasn't really even an official roll taken. It passed overwhelmingly in the House, and it was the president threatened to veto it, and he says he's going to. I have several concerns with it. Number one, it's not enforceable. Saudi Arabia, any judgment that Saudi Arabia could have imposed on it would just be crumbled up and thrown out, because at the end of the day, the U.S. government isn't going to help the victims. They're not going to put sanctions on Saudi Arabia or something like that. They're not going to do anything that would actually get some sort of judgment out of Saudi Arabia. So it's one of those good feel-good bills, but it's really not. At the end of the day, I don't see how it's going to be very enforceable. I don't see how it's going to provide any benefit to anybody Many of the victims of the 9/11 terror attacks already got wrongful death suits settled after 9/11. So it's a nice election year piece, it seems like, but I just don't see I see the costs far outweighing the benefits and all of it.
Well, and another criticism I heard is that what's to say that some other country doesn't go, okay, we can sue the U.S. now. Our citizens can sue the U.S. So it's kind of like, are we willing to take in what we dish out? Caleb, I mean, would you agree? I don't know your thoughts on this because I haven't talked with you about it yet, but would you agree that it is just kind of like political showmanship and kind of this idea that, well, I want to go back and be able to tell the constituents, hey, I made it to where we can sue the terrorist?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I'm a little bit, I go back and forth on this. I'm not entirely sure with this specific bill exactly where I stand quite yet, but I think this does open up a bit of a broader topic concerning whether or not Saudi Arabia really should be considered allies to us, because I think for a large part a lot of the things that they do and a lot of the things that they may even do to us, it's kind of swept under the rug just because we consider them an ally. And I think it's about time we really reconsider whether or not they should really be considered allies to the United States or not.
I'd agree with that. I think. Well, I also think the possibility of us ditching them as buddies is very low. But I mean, they're not good people. Like we kind of know that a lot of the people that we consider allies are not the greatest people.
Mm-hmm.
They would say that we're not the greatest people. It's a very unhealthy relationship that we have with a lot of countries. But nonetheless, I still think that it's just scary from the standpoint of like, what kind of message does it send? What kind of precedent does it set?
Right. Well, and there's another part of the bill that says that if the attorney general's already in talks with the country that's being sued for this, because essentially the amendment doesn't actually mention Saudi Arabia. It mentions any government that was involved in terrorist activities that killed American citizens. So that could be anybody from Saudi Arabia to Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Palestine. For the purposes of debate, we'll just call Palestine its own, country at this point. That could be any of those people. And so while we don't necessarily have amicable relationships with all of those people, some of them, like Saudi Arabia, we have necessary partnerships. And so I keep harking back to it's just not enforceable. There's nothing we can do about it,
And how does it really work? Are we going to okay, you've been summoned, yep. Saudi Arabian government. Like, how does it, do they come to our court? Like, I don't understand the logistics of suing another country.
You file in district court. It would probably be in New York at this point. You would file in a district court, and Saudi Arabia can show up, and if they don't show up, you'll get a summary judgment in your favor, most likely. And then that's when they'll either appeal or they'll just take it from there, and Saudi Arabia will be like, okay, we owe these families X amount of dollars. Where's the paper shredder? Because we're not going to do anything about it. Like, and we're being, it's not a funny topic necessarily because of 9/11, but it's just, this is the worst way to go about it. I don't see anything but political showmanship here. So, and what kind of precedent are we setting when we just say, oh, well, every country, that promotes terrorism or in some way aids a terrorist can be sued by a citizen of the United States? Well, I'm waiting for the first lawsuit to come down from a Pakistani citizen that was the victim of a U.S. drone strike once they find out who the drone operator was, Are we really going to say that was that's enforceable and we're going to make our U.S. citizen pay it? No, of course not.
Well, yeah, I think that's the challenge that's presented with it. Caleb, do you have any other comments on that? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, just the fact that this really is kind of really interesting, because I think we'd have a lot better standing if we weren't necessarily so dependent upon them, and even if it wasn't necessarily, well, we're going to sue you, if you could just say, well, we're just not going to do any more business with you. I think that sends a much louder message than even that could.
For sure. And just wrapping this up, I'll leave you with the quote from Chuck Schumer, who's one of the bill's sponsors. He says, if the Saudis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, quote, they have nothing to fear about going to court. That's Chuck Schumer, an elected senator. Yeah, so that's all we can really say about it. I mean, again, not a joking matter, but the kind of the premise of it, but it's a bit outrageous when we dive into the specifics of it. So, well, guys, thank you for joining. Thanks for joining the panel this week. Thanks for helping us out here. Evan, where can people find you on the internet?
I am mostly available on Twitter at Evan Schrage. That's at EvanSchrage. Still have a Bitmoji as my avatar.
Not like that'll ever end, probably.
Nope.
Caleb, where can people find you on the internet, and where can they find your upcoming show?
On Twitter, at Caleb Franz, CalebFranz, and on Twitter as well, at Miliberty, MILLIBERTY.
In case anyone forgot how to spell liberty.
Exactly.
Very good.
There are those out there.
Thank you for joining us. If you are subscribed on iTunes, or rather, if you're not subscribed on iTunes, go subscribe on iTunes. There you can find all of our other shows in the OUTSET network. You can also rate and review them. It'll help us out greatly. Thank you all so much. Thank you, guys.